You are walking down a busy street when someone collapses 10 feet in front of you. 40 other people are walking that same street right now. Here's the strange part. The more of those 40 people who see it happen, the less likely any single one of them is to stop and help. That sentence should not make sense. More witnesses should mean more help, not less. But it is one of the most repeatedly confirmed findings in the history of psychology, and the story of how we discovered it starts with a murder that the world got almost entirely wrong. In March of 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. Days later, the New York Times ran a story claiming that 38 of her neighbors heard her screams, watched from their windows, and did nothing. Not one person called the police while it was happening. The story spread everywhere. Newspapers, sermons, college lectures, it became a symbol of everything wrong with modern life, proof that cities had made people cold and indifferent to each other's suffering. Here is the twist almost no one learns. Decades of later investigation found that the story was largely wrong. There were not 38 witnesses who watched it all unfold. Most residents heard only a brief cry in the dark, assumed it was a drunken argument or a lover's quarrel, and had no idea a woman was dying. At least one person did call the police. The number 38 was likely invented by a newspaper editor chasing a bigger headline, so the famous story that supposedly proved humanity's coldness was in large part a myth. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting. Two young psychologists named Darley and Latané read that same flawed newspaper account in 1964, and instead of accepting the easy explanation that people had simply become heartless, they asked a different question. What if something about being part of a group changes how an individual person behaves in an emergency? Not because people are cruel, because something quieter and more mechanical is happening inside the group itself. They decided to test it. In 1968, Darley and Latané ran an experiment that would define an entire field of psychology. They placed a single participant in a small room and told them they would be having a discussion over an intercom with other participants in separate rooms. In reality, there were no other real participants. Everything the subject heard was a pre-recorded track. Partway through the discussion, one of the recorded voices began to have what sounded like a seizure, choking and calling for help before the audio cut to static. Here's the experiment's key variable. Some participants believed they were the only other person listening in. Some believed there was one other listener besides themselves. Some believed there were 4 other listeners. When participants believed they were the only one who could hear the seizure, 85% of them left the room to get help, almost all of them within the first minute. When participants believed 4 other people could also hear it, that number dropped to just 31%. Many of them never left the room at all, even as the emergency continued to unfold in front of them. Same emergency, same choking voice, same static. The only thing that changed was how many other people the participant believed were also listening. Why would knowing that other people are present make you personally less likely to help? Darley and Latané called it diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only witness to an emergency, the entire weight of responsibility sits on you alone. There is no one else it could possibly fall to. But the moment you believe others are also watching, that responsibility quietly splits. Some small part of your mind assumes someone else will handle it, someone more qualified, someone closer, someone already moving. Multiply that assumption across a crowd, and you get a room full of people each individually assuming someone else has it covered, while the emergency continues untouched. This is not a flaw unique to callous people. In the actual experiment, the participants who failed to act were not calm. Many of them showed visible signs of distress, sweating, trembling hands, nervous speech, while sitting frozen in their chairs. Their bodies knew something was wrong. Their sense of personal responsibility, diluted by the presence of others, kept them from moving. There is a second mechanism at work too, one that reveals something even stranger about how we process uncertainty in a group. Picture yourself in that busy street again. Someone collapses. Your first instinct is not necessarily to act, it is to check. You glance around at everyone else's face for half a second, trying to read whether this is actually an emergency or something ordinary you are misreading. Is that person having a medical crisis, or are they just tying their shoe? Here is the trap. Everyone else on that street is doing the exact same thing at the exact same moment. Each person glances at the crowd, sees calm, neutral faces, and concludes there must be nothing seriously wrong. But those calm faces are not evidence of calm. They are other people running the same internal check you are, each one waiting for someone else to react first, each one accidentally reassuring everyone around them that nothing is happening. Psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. A room full of individually uncertain people manages to convince itself, collectively and wrongly, that everything is fine, purely by reading each other's frozen expressions instead of the actual event unfolding in front of them. It is a strange kind of trap built entirely out of politeness and social calibration. Nobody wants to be the person who overreacts to a false alarm in front of strangers, so everyone quietly waits for someone braver to go first, and sometimes nobody ever does. This single discovery has been replicated in study after study for more than 50 years, across different countries, different emergencies, different crowd sizes, staged accidents, simulated smoke pouring into waiting rooms, mock crimes, deliberately dropped items. The pattern holds with remarkable consistency. Individuals help, crowds hesitate, and the bigger the crowd, the longer that hesitation tends to last. But here is the part that should genuinely change how you think about this. The twist inside the twist. Once researchers understood the mechanism, they discovered something almost as important as the problem itself. itself. The bystander effect can be broken, and it can be broken by one specific, learnable action. If you are ever the person who needs help in a crowd, do not shout into the crowd generally. Point directly at one person, look them in the eye, say a specific instruction, something like, "You in the blue jacket, call an ambulance now." The instant you single out one individual, you collapse the diffusion of responsibility entirely. There is no longer a crowd sharing the weight. There is one person who has just been personally, unmistakably assigned the task, and that mechanism, the one that made strangers freeze for decades of psychology experiments, reverses itself almost instantly. Emergency responders are trained on exactly this principle today: point, name, assign. It sounds almost too simple to be the antidote to one of psychology's most persistent findings, but it works because it directly targets the mechanism causing the freeze in the first place. This changes the entire moral of the Kitty Genovese story too. The original myth told us that people in cities had become monstrous, that modern life had eroded some basic human decency that used to exist. The real science tells us something both less dramatic and more useful. It was never about coldness. It was about a predictable, well-documented glitch in how groups process shared responsibility, a glitch that exists in every one of us, and a glitch we now know exactly how to override. So the next time you are part of a crowd witnessing something uncertain, whether it is a stranger who looks unwell, a car pulled over on the roadside, or a person visibly struggling in public, remember what is actually happening in that moment. You are not surrounded by people who do not care. You are surrounded by people running the exact same silent calculation you are, each one waiting for someone else to move first, each one capable of acting. The instant responsibility becomes personal instead of shared. You do not need to wait for someone braver to go first. You can be the one who breaks the pattern simply by turning to one specific person and giving them one specific job. The crowd on that street 40 years ago was never made of monsters. Neither is the one you are standing in today. It is only ever waiting for someone to point and say, "You."